Hi, everyone. Welcome to our weekly Tuesday Night University series, which this month we are dedicating to a deeper dive into immigration, a look at immigration from a whole bunch of different lenses. We'll be talking Jewish values some weeks with Rabbi Susan. We will be looking at policy. We will be looking at the current state of immigration here in Missouri. Both of which I think will be part of the themes here tonight. So it's my real pleasure and my real honor to introduce Sara John, the Executive Director of IFCLA. I'm very proud to be a board member of IFCLA myself, and a big part of the reason why, beyond my dedication really to the mission of IFCLA, is that Sara John is one of the most inspiring, hardworking, dedicated folks that you will meet in the justice space. Even as she shakes her head, those of us who know her know how true this is. Spending time with Sara always makes me rededicated to this work and recommitted to the importance of it and the sacredness of it. Really, she's a treasure of the St. Louis and now significantly Missouri justice community, as I'm hoping you'll share a little bit about. So with that, I am going to turn this over to Sara John and make myself disappear a little bit. So welcome to CRC, or welcome back to CRC. You're an old friend of CRC. In fact, like a week into working at CRC, you managed to get me arrested. So, really old friends here.
I mean, it's the way we do things sometimes, right? No, I'm so excited to be here and grateful for the space, and really hopeful and excited for the time that we get to be back at the spaces at CRC, the physical spaces, which I always find to be so revitalizing, actually, to just be in that building and around people. I've had the privilege to be there a handful of times, so I'm looking forward to that again. Nonetheless, hello, everyone. This is a little bit new for me to do the live streaming, and so I am less familiar engaging with folks who I can't actually see on screen. So thanks in advance for your patience for that. But tonight we are going to talk a little bit about inclusion and dignity in terms of immigration and what that means in our community, in our St. Louis community. So before we dive into everything, I am also so excited to be speaking with you all alongside some of my most favorite and most amazing colleagues. And so I'd like to invite Chris and Rita and Bully to come in, and if you could introduce yourselves and your organization, and maybe let's do something that is something that made you laugh recently. We could start that conversation and pretend that if we were in person, we'd be going around the room and all laughing about all the hysterical things that you are all experiencing at home. But in the meantime, just hold those things in your heart or pop them into the chat. So Polly, can I ask you to get us started, please?
Hello, everybody. I am Polly from Alive and Well Communities, and I echo Rabbi Dan's information on Sara. She is pretty incredible. Okay, I should not be laughing about this, but on Saturday, the police was outside my neighbor's house down the street, and they stayed there for a while. And we were just happened to leave the house, and he was watching them from the corner, laying down on the grass laughing, and they were looking for him, but clearly they didn't know that he was down the street checking them out. And I thought that was pretty hilarious. I should not laugh about that, but I can pass it over to Chris.
Uh-oh, can everybody hear me? Chris, are you there?
I'm here now. Sorry, did you want me to go next? I'm sorry, I missed that. Sorry. I'm Chris Walentic. I'm the immigration managing attorney with St. Francis Community Services. Sarah, you're putting me on the spot. I think I laugh the most when I'm hanging out with my 5-year-old nephew and my 9-year-old nephew. So I did a lot of that this weekend, playing football with them. So that was a lot of laughter.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rita Chang. I am the Policy and Advocacy Coordinator over at IFCLA and the Program Manager for the Immigrant Service Providers Network. And, okay, so I'm just going to pull the young card, and I was laughing at an Instagram reel, and apparently, if you are not aware, there's going to be a Peppa Pig theme park opening in Florida in February of 2022. You're welcome. Back to you, Sarah.
And I feel like we should just snort randomly throughout the presentation now, as Peppa Pig does. So maybe we'll just incorporate that in the evening, just to make sure everyone is wide awake on this Tuesday evening. I am going to jump into our slides and we will kick things off. And if someone could confirm that they are just seeing slides and not my whole messy desktop, that would be delightful. Okay, great. So I want to just briefly outline what we think we're going to try to work through tonight. So I want to make sure that you have a chance to hear from everyone. So we have 4 organizations here tonight: IFCLA, ISPN, St. Francis, and Alive and Well. So I want to make sure that you hear about the incredible work that's happening. But before we do that, I want to maybe start with some shared language around immigration and what I think that means, sort of some basic premises for how I would say safely the 4 of us approach immigration issues in St. Louis. And then really you'll hear from everyone here on the panel, and then we'll open for discussion. I think if you haven't figured it out already, all 4 of us could probably spend like a solid 6 hours talking about these topics and our work, and especially doing it together. So I'd rather us focus on how we can be of service to you in your continued learning trajectory. So please pop questions into the chat or into the Q&A. You can comment, I believe, on social media and on the YouTubing, and Rabbi Daniel will help us see all of those things. And then we will go from there. But right before we end, I want to make sure that we have a couple direct invitations. And then I will be sure that CRC has copies of our slides. There's a lot of links and information in there, and we will be sure that you can access all that information afterwards. Panel, sound like a good plan? Is this what we discussed? No one's being voluntold here. All right, awesome. Let's jump in. I will speak briefly about IFCLA. We have been around in St. Louis for not quite 40 years. I'm very excited to celebrate our 40th anniversary next year. And we have been founded on sort of these 3 principles that, while a lot of our work has changed over those 40 years, education, organizing, and accompaniment, or education and advocacy and accompaniment, have been sort of stable threads that tie our work together. And I think this is deeply rooted in how we approach the work that we do. And I think we have learned in the past 5 or so years, especially, that building relationships has to be foundational for any type of change that we hope to bring about. We do lots of different things, so I want to talk about our programs briefly, but I just wanted to lift up something that Rabbi Daniel mentioned right when we started, that just a couple weeks ago, we were so honored to share that we have a vision now and an opportunity to look beyond St. Louis City and St. Louis County and our immediate region here, but look at the state of Missouri as a whole and think about what it means to build immigrant-led community power that is rooted in a belief in transformation, and that this state could look radically different than it does right now. And so we have committed to, over the next 3 years, changing our organization, changing the way our organizational partners approach this work, and ensuring that the right voices, the voices that are most directly impacted by these injustices, are at the center of building the plan forward. So I'm so excited for that. You'll hear more about that coming up soon. And if you haven't heard about it and want to, please follow us on social media, and certainly click to sign up on our website to receive our email updates, which are if I'm being honest, not very frequent. So it's not going to flood your inbox. And I think you'll still get some good information there. Some of the programs that you might know us from are about our ICE and ISAP accompaniment programs. So, and I'm pretty sure we've done a training at CRC, in fact, for this, where we train volunteers of community members to accompany individuals who have check-ins with immigration authorities in St. Louis to go together. It's really just a humanizing space in the face of a system that consistently seeks to dehumanize immigrants. And so we started that in 2017 and are still working through that in terms of COVID and sort of also being really aware that offices are going to be reopening again, continuing to open, and all of it is going to change again. We've also expanded our efforts with Pro Se Asylum. And so that work is about supporting people who want to seek asylum, who can't always find an attorney or can't find an attorney that they can afford. And I'm sure we'll talk later about the overwhelming need for additional incredible pro bono, low bono immigration attorneys in St. Louis. We also have several advocacy efforts and initiatives, and I know many of you have seen our work with Alex Garcia and the sanctuary effort that ended earlier this year as Alex left sanctuary after 3.5 years fighting for the right to be with his family. So we have a lot going on, but I want to transition into why we're here and start with some basic sort of foundational understandings of immigration. Many of you, also those of you who maybe have attended an Immigration 101 elsewhere or even at CRC, this is going to be like hyper condensed, right? And I just want to make sure that we are sharing some of the same language. So I'd like to start with, why do people migrate? And so I'm going to show a quick video, which I believe will have audio, but if not, we will skip it, and then we'll discuss. Do you have audio?
You're not getting audio, but if you'll click stop share and then reshare, you'll see two little things like at the bottom that are like share computer audio or optimized for video, something like that.
Can you see?
Coming through.
All right, let's try it again. And if not, we will go through it. We will go on without it.
When was the last time you moved? Did you become a refugee, an immigrant, or a word on a Tea Party protest sign? Maybe not, but get this. At least 232 million people around the world, that's over 3% of the global population, are living in countries they weren't born in or aren't citizens of. The United Nations calls them international migrants. Every year, millions migrate legally and not so legally, voluntarily and not so voluntarily. Why? Here are the 3 major reasons the world is moving in unprecedented numbers. It's a sad fact, but war and persecution aren't going anywhere anytime soon. And that means there's always going to be people trying to escape it. Not everyone fleeing war is legally considered a refugee, but many are. The biggest refugee communities right now come from Afghanistan, Somalia, and most recently, Syria.
This is a few years old.
Pakistan, Kenya, and Lebanon have all taken in the biggest numbers of these refugees, despite serious challenges. In Lebanon, nearly 1 in 5 people is now a Syrian refugee. Lebanon's infrastructure and economy have been pushed to the breaking point. All this while developed countries in the world have only taken in 14% of the world's refugees. Does that sound fair to you? But the world's wealthiest countries are taking in people looking for better economic opportunities or just a better life. More than 2/3 of the world's migrants live in high-income countries, and more migrants end up in the United States than in any other country in the world. 11.7 million people born in Mexico now live in the U.S. One reason? Higher wages. Compensation in the U.S. for a single manufacturing job is 6 times higher than it is in Mexico. And it's not just the West attracting folks. One big migration trend has people from South Asia moving to the oil-rich Gulf. In the United Arab Emirates, Indians, Bangladeshis, and Pakistanis make up 90% of the private workforce, despite poor working conditions, unfair treatment, and low wages. The last major force driving people out of their homes? The environment. Most natural disasters like floods, hurricanes, and earthquakes cause internal displacement within a country. But sometimes nature actually pushes people to cross borders. A drought in the Horn of Africa led more than 83,000 Somalis to flee to Kenya in the first half of 2011 alone. Natural disasters aside, the changing climate is also a factor. In Tuvalu, a tiny island nation in the Pacific, rising sea levels are forcing people to move to nearby countries like New Zealand. So from man-made to nature-made, those are the 3 big reasons why global migration is here to stay. And considering the UN calls movement a human right, should borders be a bit more flexible? Let us know what you think by tweeting us at AJ+.
So a lot of things thrown out there, right? And I think the point is not to dive deep into this, but to understand from a human-centric perspective that people end up in different places than where they were born for a multitude of reasons. And I think that's a really basic statement, but I would invite you to maybe chew on it as we go through the rest of the conversation tonight, because it's very quick to sort of, we are very quick to sort of jump over that fact and think about all of the reasons that we assume people move, right? And so I would throw out just a couple quick pieces here. Language that you heard in the film is often referred to as push and pull factors, right? These are the whole list of things that push people out of one country and pull them into another. That could also be city, right? A lot of times you see this pushing within a country from north to south or from rural to urban, and now vice versa. I think the last big point here that I would make, and I left some content here on the slide in case we need to come back and discuss it later, but one of my biggest learnings in studying immigration in the United States is that I sort of thought that immigration was related to how people move around the world and what those needs are. When in fact, I have come to understand that immigration law, policy, and enforcement are tools to further other agendas or to pursue other outcomes. And those might be benevolent and wonderful, and they might not align with my personal values or my collective or agency values, right? And so I want to maybe just invite you to think through that. Very briefly, I wanted to offer this perspective. When I talk about immigration, I sort of have this vision of 4 primary categories of how people come to the United States. It is obviously much more complicated than this slide. So this slide does not reflect necessarily the INA and the categories of immigration or immigrants as it is expressed in the law. But I think it's a helpful tool for understanding sort of these big buckets, right? There's a bunch of people that come to the United States based on sort of what we would consider like humanitarian needs, right? We've talked a lot about refugees and asylum seekers, and we'll probably talk more about that tonight. The 2 categories in the middle are family and employment. And I think the big piece there that I would emphasize tonight is that it requires a pre-existing relationship, right? You have to know someone who's a family member or know someone that's going to hire you, right? It doesn't work the other way around. And then finally, when I talk about immigration, I understand that unauthorized or undocumented immigration, some would call it extralegal immigration, those are actually pathways that have been created and maintained now for like decades in the United States. So I think I would hope to maybe talk about this further in a conversation discussion at the end of the night, but that does feel important to me to emphasize because I include that when I think about immigration to the United States. I think I'm maybe going to skip over visa bulletin for now. And then we can come back to that in just a moment, but I would like to pass it off to whoops, and I did stop the sharing. I'm winning tonight, y'all. Let me just try this again. Doing great. This one, share. Okay, so with this sort of like very brief content foundation, I would like to invite my colleagues to talk about what sort of like this looks like in St. Louis right now, and what the pursuit of dignity or immigrant inclusion looks like here. And I will, with that, pass it to you, Rita.
Thank you, Sarah. And so I will be speaking a bit about the Immigrant Service Providers Network, the ISPN, as all of my colleagues are quite heavily involved in this network. You can click to the next slide. Well, just to tell you a bit about the ISPN, we are a network. We're a coalition. We are not a nonprofit agency. We don't provide services. We're not a 501c3, none of that. But more so, we are this kind of collaborative entity that's trying to bring together all of these different organizations, these different agencies, in pursuit of this collective vision that if we all work together, if we all collaborate, then the impact of our efforts will be greater and assist and promote the health and well-being and prosperity of immigrants across the region. Knowing that we all work in our different agencies to accomplish our missions, but knowing that there is significant overlap in the outcomes that we want to see in our community. And so what are those ways that we can work together to bridge communication gaps, to share resources out into the community, and just foster a greater awareness of what collaboration could look like? So a lot of fancy words. Essentially, basically what we're trying to do is increase collaboration by providing opportunities for education and outreach to unite organizations, as well as individuals in pursuit of that collective vision. We just want to make sure that people learn how to work together better in order to, get the work done and make sure that we're, doing everything that we can in pursuit of the community benefits. Ways that we do that. So I just said a lot of abstract things, but in practice, what that looks like is we host monthly meetings where immigrant service providers, community advocates, direct service providers show up. They network, now on Zoom, and just try to build relationships in that way. We also promote awareness of different community organizations, different resources in the community for immigrants. We send out a weekly newsletter with resources that we crowdsource from providers. Educating community members and service providers, just trying to make sure that the folks in our community are experts. They've been working in the field for decades and are aware of, these distinctions, and trying to make sure that the community at large knows about issues that immigrants are facing now and ways that they can support them. And then finally, supporting coordinated and collaborative efforts for increasing access to community resources. This is, I would say, ISPN's way of trying to bring providers together to address a community need. In 2020, it was trying to address the lack of available public health data that was showing the impact of COVID on immigrants. It was also trying to address the community need of language access in publicly available resources. And it was also trying to bring awareness to and crowdsource and fundraise in order to address the gap that was created because undocumented and mixed status families were left out of several public benefit programs as we were all struggling during COVID. And COVID still hasn't gone away, so there's that. Next slide. I think that might be it. Yes, and I will just pass it on to Chris to talk more about her work at St. Francis.
Thanks, Rita. Thanks for having me tonight. As I said earlier, I'm from St. Francis Community Services. We are a nonprofit organization. We are one of the federal entities of Catholic Charities of St. Louis. And while we work with many different groups of people. We have 2 programs specifically that work really predominantly with immigrants. You can go to the next slide, Sarah. So I'm going to talk to you about a little bit about, first of all, the other site that I'm in the legal department, but our Immigrant Services Center, which we work very closely with, is located down in the Bevo Mill neighborhood. And it works primarily with Spanish speaking and Vietnamese speaking populations. It has several different social services. It has a Vietnamese clinic. It has bilingual case management, bilingual mental health services, which are in our schools, as well as for adults in the city and the county. And we have a youth program. So we're really trying to meet the needs of not only new arrivals, but also we have a large community that's been here in the United States for several years and have come to Southside for 15, 20 years. They've gone through different family members, having new family members arrive. So we kind of get to see the cycle. We see our kids in the youth program that start at an early age, and then they're volunteering when they're in high school to help out. So we've been around for over 25 years working in this community. And so we're really trying to make sure that everything is linguistically and culturally accessible to our clients. And then you can go to the next slide, Sarah. I work in the immigration law department, which maybe is not as exciting, but I always feel like the boring one when I speak. But we provide free legal representation to immigrants from any country. Our population, while we do have probably 30 to 40% are Spanish speakers, we also have a lot of different populations. We've also been around about 35 years now. And we have gone through different populations as the wave of immigrants have come through St. Louis. Worked a lot with the Bosnians in the 90s and early 2000s, and then have kind of met the needs of the Somalis and the Afghans, Iraqis, and really right now, I'd say we are really working with people at the southern border coming from Central America, coming from Mexico, and from Haiti. So we provide services to not only like families who are bringing, they're trying to reunite with family members, and we do affirmative action, which basically just means people who are family reunification petitions, working with citizenship, people who are getting their green cards. We also work with victims of violence, victims of domestic violence, and other sorts of crimes. And really with a lot of asylum seekers, both affirmatively and defensively. And when I talk about defensively, I'm talking about immigration removal proceedings where people are facing deportation, whether they came in and overstayed their visas or they were caught at the border and placed into removal proceedings. So we go on that journey with them. And as a nonprofit, it's not just the legal cases that we're looking at. We end up really looking at a lot of different needs. We have a client support coordinator. We work closely with our Immigrant Services Center to do case management, working with all kinds of different needs, a lot of mental health needs, housing. We have a housing immigrant justice program, housing justice program for legal needs in the housing, especially that came out of COVID, given that there's obviously, as Rita had mentioned with ISPN, but we have also seen the need with housing, with moratoriums, and then not coming off of that, how to respond to what people are looking for and what they need with their rental assistance and their legal, if their landlords are trying to evict them improperly. So we want to be there for them for that. And some of our cases can be pretty short. And then we have other cases that we are working on for 5 or 6 years. So removal, unfortunately, is really slow. Our courts are closed, our courts in Kansas City. And so people do have to travel, which is always a challenge. It can be a challenge for people, but we try to do as much here in St. Louis. And the other thing we really work on, and why we work so much with these other women here tonight, is because of our community outreach and education, working both within the immigrant communities to respond to the needs of whatever's happening in our immigration climate, as well as to the broader community to educate them on. So we kind of have that as our twofold mission. And then one thing, you can go to the next slide. I want to make a little plug here, and something that we can talk about a little later, but Abriendo Puertas is a opening doors. It's a program that we've just started at our Immigrant Service Center, and it is for welcoming new arrivals, especially from the southern border. When families come, sometimes they have family members already here and established, and they have a friend to go and live with, but they're being welcomed into these homes, and they don't always have all the things that they need to meet those needs. They don't have enough beds, they don't have enough food or blankets or any other some of the other basic needs that they need. So this program has been created. We worked with 27 families, and we're on a second round of it now, where we are trying to provide, and really the ladies at Southside are doing all of the work, providing different household needs to these families as they have new family members come in, or a whole new family that's just arrived. So this is a program that we are always looking for donors and sponsors for. And I think, Polly, thank you, just put the link in the chat. So thank you. I think I'm passing it on now.
Buenas noches, everybody. I am Polly Rijos. I am the co-director of community activation for Alive and Well communities. We are based here in St. Louis, but we serve the whole state of Missouri, a tiny bit of Illinois, and definitely Kansas City in the Kansas area. Our goal is activate communities to heal. Next slide, please. Our job is to talk to all of you about what is the impact of trauma and toxic stress, but also shift that conversation, right, and promote some healing, some well-being, and equity. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. We want to change the question. We are constantly asking people what's wrong with you, and we need to start thinking about what happened to you. So when you think about our new neighbors, you got to think about what may have happened to them in the past that could have had some effect on the way that they interacted with you, or something that you did may have been triggering to them. So we have to give some grace to each other and ask what happened to you. So jointly we work with communities, organizations, or you as an individual. Next slide. So I put this tree here because our work is based on the adverse childhood experiences. Many of us have experienced several of these, what we call ACEs, which I didn't know about till I was 3 years old. And I had been a clinician for like over 10 years before I learned about how ACEs had an impact in myself, the way that I was showing up when serving my patients or my clients, but also that there were things that were happening underground that were kind of feeding like our community, our St. Louis, and also the communities that our migrants and immigrants are coming from. We have to think about those roots like violence, poverty, discrimination, disruption. And it doesn't call it out here, but racism is a huge issue. When we think about what our Black immigrants are facing in the border and inside our courts. Next, please. How do we do this work? We gotta name racism and those oppressive systems. We have to work together to disrupt. We got to center the voice of those who are impacted. All of my colleagues here have talked about it. Like, it's not about you or me, it's about the folks who we're partnering with, centering their voice and making sure that they are actually leading the work. And in terms of leading, we have to figure out what works. We focus on evidence-based, action research, whatever combination it is that is going to address toxic stress and trauma. Next. We believe that we have to talk about the harm and the consequences of trauma, but especially anti-Black racism. And the reason is, if our Black community is doing well, all of us are going to do well. And the same happens with our Black immigrants. If we are centering or focusing on their experiences and targeting a few of them, we all benefit from it. We have to work together. Rita mentioned it. At ISPN, we work using radical and intentional collaboration. We have to be committed to listening, to learning, and unlearning. Like I had to unlearn some of my clinical training. And you all, the healer can't heal if you don't rest. We got to take care of ourselves, and we got to rest before we can go out and do this work. Next. So what can I offer as a neighbor, as a colleague, and as a member of a congregation? We offer free educational services. We go to events. If you have some events in the community you want us to table, we'll be there. We work on advocacy. We have campaigns. Sign up for our newsletter. We mobilize people. And we also serve in organizations by providing you with coaching. We can look at your policies. Are they trauma informed? And all of this is based in our theory of change, or many people call it a logic model. But what we do is we build, which means we provide education. So you can sign up for our trauma awareness training. It's free, you all. Every month, once a month, come to our training, because you can't be a good neighbor. You can't be out supporting our immigrant community if you are not trauma informed. We connect. Like part of my job is like saying, oh, do you know Rita? Do you know Chris? Let me tell you, let's work together. And we want to disrupt. We have to take care of some of those old systems and start changing them, so that we can build trauma-informed communities. Next. So how can you support your neighbors? Become trauma-informed, join the Immigrant Service Providers Network, be an advocate, but get informed first, educate yourself. We are eternal learners. Every day I learn something, so you have to commit yourself to the process of humbling yourself down, that you're gonna have to learn. Become an ambassador, help me out, join our community, join our steering committee also. And I'm gonna drop our link tree, and Rudy, we will answer your questions, we promise, very soon.
Okay, let me find the right buttons here. This was a pretty, I think that, again, like, I just want to make sure this was this was not intended to be a comprehensive presentation, either on immigration or on any one of our agencies, but to give some highlights so that we could open a conversation. And so that's what we'd like to do now. And I am going to ask Rabbi Daniel to support. I think he was pulling some questions together here. But if anyone is on Zoom and you want to come off mute and ask your question or put it in the chat, whatever feels comfortable to you.
I've got a few questions that I'm pulling from YouTube and Facebook for y'all. The first question relates, I think it was you, Chris, who said something. What are the demographics of the immigrant community here in Missouri, and how has this changed significantly over the last few decades? And sort of pulling from a second question, how has the experience of immigrants who present as white been significantly different from immigrants of color and Black immigrants to the St. Louis region in particular? So combining all of those, I'll pass those off to you all.
I can start, but I bet Sarah probably can give a little bit more of the numbers than I can. Sorry, going back to the first thing, demographics in Missouri. I mean, obviously I think the last I saw was about 4% of our population in Missouri. So we're not a huge population of immigrants in Missouri. However, in the St. Louis area, I think our biggest populations are still Mexicans, Bosnians, Indians. That's really in the St. Louis city area. So when you go broader. But I would say what I've seen in the 10 years that I've been practicing in St. Louis is just a shift from more Mexicans to more Central Americans, with more families coming, with more women and children coming across the border. And that's who we're seeing in St. Louis: Guatemalans, Hondurans, Salvadorans, and now Haitians we're starting to see more and more of. We've had some before, but we are seeing more coming into St. Louis. And do you want to add anything to that, Sarah?
The only thing I would point out, if we had a lot more time to get into it, is that I think we sometimes, it's easy to think that the populations that we're seeing in St. Louis or immigrating to the United States in general are like happening by happenstance, when in fact we have a history as a country of passing laws to shape exactly who and what those people look like, right? And so you can go back to look at very early immigration laws that are always framed from a place of exclusion, not an inclusion, right? So the laws talk about who cannot come in. Maybe you are, I think one of the earlier ones that I remember reading about was if you are a dunce, I think was the language used, or an idiot, or if you were a prostitute, you were not welcome in the United States. And that sort of attitude of identifying the characteristics or qualities of a human being, that pattern continued as our nation's immigration laws developed. In 1965, there was a big pivotal shift that came at the end of the Bracero program and the start of the what was called the Hart-Celler Act, that largely shaped and changed which people come from which countries. And so even when you look, if you like zoom way into something like the quotas or limits for family-based immigration, we have this idea that originated in, or was established or finalized or whatever, affirmed in 1965, that we don't want any more from any one country to be like overrepresented in the United States. And so in one sense, you're like, oh yeah, of course, that would be like equal, right? What that shapes then is that there are not the same numbers of people fleeing each country or trying to come to the United States from different countries, right? And so then we have to think about, like what Polly said, and I love that space of the roots, right? What's below the ground that we don't always see, because we're also shaping like who can come based on those other factors. And I think Honduras is a perfect example of why we're seeing laws that treat people fleeing conditions in Honduras differently than people fleeing conditions in Afghanistan, even when the conditions are largely the same. Polly, I know you had also maybe wanted to weigh in, or Rita too, about the Black-white immigrant experience.
I just want to share that even within our own communities, there are issues related to racism or colorism. And I just want to emphasize that there's important of allyship and education within our own groups, right? Even in my own family, there are these nuances or things that we don't talk about and that have become more obvious as I've gotten older, because I have a mom who is white presenting and I have a dad who is Black presenting, but they're both Puerto Rican, right? And we've had to have some tough conversations about how we present in public, and how that can be magnified for some of our immigrants here, who on top of having skin, right, that like people see you every day, you on top of that have an accent. And people make assumptions based on the color of your skin and your accent. Sometimes they make assumptions about your education or how much you know, right? Because I work with individuals who may have a 6th grade level and are brilliant, just geniuses. So that is important that we talk about it within our own communities, but also that how it magnifies the impact of being a Black immigrant in this country. And something that lately the ladies here have been teaching me, but also like reading is we have some lack of misinformation about immigrants that are waiting at the Mexico border that are coming from Haiti, and you don't hear much about it. So why is that, right? It just makes me think about what could potentially be affecting that at the end of the day, the color of our skin has some way in the immigration process.
I think something quick that I would just also add, tagging on to what Polly's saying, that we have to name, how systemic racism has permeated the fabric of our society, and just echoing what Sarah was talking about, how US policies have over time just continuously excluded folks, and that's how we construct what a citizen is, and that construction of citizenship is based on whiteness. And so when we're talking about racism, we have to name how that is, in the early days, in the 1800s, that was the determination of whether or not you could naturalize or you could even be considered a citizen. And then if you take into account the sorts of documents needed, well, that's a story for another time.
Rabbi Daniel, do you have another one?
Yes, there are a few different questions all revolving around, you had mentioned earlier, Sarah, ways that unauthorized immigration has been encouraged and in fact, in some ways made official by United States policy. And so there were a few different questions, all of which I think we're hoping you would go into some depth on that.
Sure, I would be happy to start, and I know that there is other expertise on the panel. So when I say that, what I mean, and I guess I will focus my comments in two ways. One is that when you look at how we have treated immigrants as assets, that changes as if it were a commodity, as if people were commodities. And that became very clear to me when studying the Bracero program, which was a guest worker program that was created during the World Wars, and brought labor here from specific targeted countries, while all of the big, strong, brawny US men were like fighting our wars. Who was going to take care of us poor little women? We better bring in men from other countries to do the jobs that men were doing. I'm going to not name all of the things that we could spend a long time talking about. But 20 years later, when we were done, when our men came back and we no longer needed additional laborers, we ended the program, and within a year passed additional laws to criminalize people who had been living here for 20 years and instantly decided those people are now not welcome, and not only not welcome, but they are made to be illegal. And their existence here was criminalized. And so when I think about that, what you saw in the messaging, and when you pull up the old articles and newspapers and even comments from elected officials, right, you see things that are like, where did all of these people come from? How are all of these illegal workers still here, and blah, blah, blah. And it's this like hyperbolic exaggeration of like shock and surprise that realistically many people would look at it and go like, when you gave people status for 20 years and then took it away within 1 year and expected like, that's it, we're done, return to sender. That's not how human beings work. Like in the last 20 years of your life, I would encourage you to think about what happened. I could name life, death, marriage, divorce, birth, school, job, buying a car, buying a home, losing a car, right? Like go through the whole thing and actually just like, oh, you're done here. Thank you. Bye. That's not. So I think like that is part of this like origin story of how that works. When I think then I'm going to shift to the border comments because when we started drastically changing the border with Mexico in the early 1990s, it became then even abundantly clear to me that the way we constructed the border, physically and in law and policy, which I would say mostly was policy, there was only a couple laws that actually came through Congress that shaped that, but those actions served to filter the kinds of people that came to this country by making sure that people who could survive physically strenuous journeys could come and then stay here, while also we built systems to profit off of their presence here. I think one of the most egregious ways that I understood this was when studying hypermilitarization at urban ports of entry, which came about through prevention through deterrent style policies that shut down city centers and pushed people into more rural areas of the border, which led to an exponential increase in death and disappearance among undocumented immigrants while not changing migratory flows. It didn't reduce significantly the number of people that come to the United States. It changed where they come, where they cross, how they cross, and it changed the consequence in physical life in human life for doing so. The problem is that at some point, if you made those policies and then saw this consequence, you would say, oh shit, we probably shouldn't do this, right? There would be a moment of reckoning of like, oh man, we thought we were gonna deter people from coming, and instead that didn't work and it's had these horrible consequences. Let's do something different. When in fact, since then, since literally 1990, we have doubled, tripled, quadrupled down on the same policies. And our government and the agents that work for it, that continue to maintain it and profit from it, know it. And you can read it in congressional testimony. It's not a big secret. This is an added benefit to the United States in more ways than one. And I think that financial aspect for me is just egregious in terms of where our values are and how we look at what we're trying to do with immigration law and policy. And when we know we're doing something, if I would do the same thing in this job, people like my board would probably say, Sarah, you're not getting intended results. Change your plan. Do something different. Not, sure, Sarah, let me give you some more money to keep doing that. I'm sure if you had more money, you could totally nail this and it will absolutely work. And yet, that's what we continue to do in border policy, and we continue to profit off of loss of life. Sorry, does anyone else weigh in on that?
I'm just going to give a couple of real practical, more specific how laws have maybe created part of the problems that you've explained. Just the first one is with asylum seekers and people coming. We're requiring people to make it to the United States and then file their applications. And they're expected to come here. They get placed in removal at the border, whether they're asking for asylum or they've come across and then they're asking at the border or right immediately, or they're coming across through a different channel and then being caught by immigration. They're asked to go through this system, this court system, this procedural system in a different language that they don't speak, with no right to an attorney. They have the right to have an attorney, but not a free attorney. No one's going to pay for them to have representation like we do in a criminal system, although we have no problems criminalizing immigrants for coming across our border unlawfully. And they're expected to go to court. These court cases take 4 to 5 years sometimes. And I have cases that are already set out for 2024. And they're asked to go through that process and explain. So that just starts to create a larger group of undocumented that are in this kind of limbo land for several years that they can't get out of necessarily. And then we look at the approval rates in asylum law, and they are less than 50% overall. But in our courts, the average is around 75% denial rate, I believe. And it's higher. Well, in our court specifically, in Kansas City, our court, that denial rate's up in the 85, 90 area. So it's so difficult to fit all of their story into that little box that is asylum. And that just creates more fear as well. If they don't have the evidence, if they don't have the supportive attorneys to explain their cases. They just get worried about even fighting their case. And then the other example I was just going to give is just what Sarah had mentioned earlier with family reunification and having people wait in the alleged line that we have, and how that is not practical. It doesn't work. As Sarah said, we've had quotas of how many people from a certain country, and they don't want too many people coming from one country, but all that's done is say that, for instance, a sibling, if you are a US citizen applying for a sibling from Mexico, they're processing applications from 1996 right now, 1997, something like that. So no one's going to wait. If they want to see their parents, a parent files for a child that's married and over 21 from, from the Philippines, I think it's close to the 90s as well. So people aren't waiting for that because it's not a practical line. It's not something that actually works. And so I think those are some of the specific examples.
How about anything else, Rabbi?
There's a comment question expressing some disappointment in the Biden administration when it comes to immigration policies, and asking what needs to change. What would you like to see changed?
For me, is accountability, right? So we elect folks to positions where they can make decisions over our lives. They ran on a certain platform, but we do not hold them accountable. So without getting too political, we have to go back and say, you said that you were going to do X, Y, and Z, and you are actually affecting families, individuals, and it has impacts for generations. So, right, call, and mobilize.
Polly, I think you expressed that in less words and probably with less profanities than I would have. So I was trying to collect myself. But essentially, I would echo that and just say that, these laws and these policies, at the end of the day, the people in Congress and in Biden's administration, they are making laws and policies and decisions that impact our community. And so even if you are not someone who is directly impacted, or you don't believe that you are, these policies impact us all. And so just trying to go back to, we tried to get people elected because they said that they would do things that honor the dignity of all people. And now it is the time to tell, is that really true or not? And so trying to get citizenship for all in the budget, trying to demilitarize our communities, trying to dial back and eliminate the surveillance technology that's plaguing our communities, usually poor Black and Brown communities in particular. So it's about accountability, and it's about making sure that the people that you elect and the policies that you support are ultimately trying to honor the dignity of all people.
The last thing I would add to that is I just wanted to lift up Rita's work, because Rita has been sharing a lot of resources regarding the budgeting process. And I know CRC is not unfamiliar with moral budgets and moral budgeting and what that looks like, and in other and parallel issues. And I think there's also a space here where part of accountability comes from looking at how we're spending money and what we're investing in, and what we're not seeing. Maybe we're seeing a slower increase in budgets, but we're seeing an increase in budgets. We're still seeing this, we need more enforcement and more policing and more capacity to criminalize immigrants, and specifically immigrants of color, and not less. And we're changing the way we're talking about that, right? We don't hear it with the maybe explicit language that felt so offensive and egregious to people in the previous administration, but we're still seeing many of the same premises upheld. Good immigrants, bad immigrants. Some people are worthy and deserving, some people aren't. Some people deserve welcome, some people don't. Let alone forgiveness. Maybe I'm not going to get on the preachy box about that one yet, but we're seeing the same things coded differently. It's using different languages to do the same thing. And that makes it really hard for organizations like us to help folks understand the nuances in that conversation. We could talk about Title 42. Chris, do you want to weigh in about that?
Title 42 is the keeping people out because of health issues, aka anti-COVID. We're afraid that everybody's coming in with COVID, and that it's the people from the southern border coming from Mexico who are bringing COVID with them and spreading it around, and that's their solution. When in reality, that is clearly not the case, and just the requirements that keeping people in Mexico because of that.
I think we could all appreciate how flawed of a logic that might be, since we are living in a state as a mother of an unvaccinated child still that has less than 50% vaccination. But it's not us, everyone, it's them. And it looks like we have another question here from Rabbi Daniel. Missouri legislature. So I'm going to read the question in case folks can't see it. So I invite my colleagues to weigh in on what is the role of Missouri in welcoming or not welcoming immigrant communities. What could the Missouri legislature or Governor Parson do or not do, or what could they do and shouldn't do? And what might we do to influence our state elected officials? Anyone want to jump in on that one?
Maybe,
Oh,
okay.
geez.
There's different ways to go about it. If you want to be super hopeful, then I will try to support your officials at the local level, like St. Louis City, St. Louis County, and advocate like many of our members at IFCLA have been doing in terms of being a sanctuary city, language access, things that are seem pretty accessible. We're talking about the state. Yeah, that's a hard one for me. I will pass it to Rita, but somewhere where we could potentially see changes, it has also to do with language access and like mobilizing and encouraging them to have documents in other languages. But I believe the official language of the state is English, so they use that at times. I'm going to pivot to Rita because, yeah.
Well, I would say first and foremost, don't criminalize cities and municipalities and localities that are trying to provide sanctuary to people who are, seeking sanctuary. That would be one. Another thing would be to make in-state tuition accessible to undocumented students. That would be another thing that would be great. Another thing that would also be excellent is, passing some legislation to make sure that undocumented tenants or immigrant tenants in general, when they're, trying to stand up for themselves and, have access to good housing and, stand up to their landlords who might be manipulating or exploiting them, making sure that, those immigrant tenants aren't at risk for deportation and can still get some good housing, just like hopefully we can ensure housing for all. That would be an excellent thing. The reason why I'm being so sarcastic about these things is because these are things that our Missouri legislature has not done, and in fact has tried to, make sure that these never are a possibility. When I listen to this question, when I hear this question, when I'm processing this, to me, it's about What does Missouri have to do to make our state more inclusive of people who are already so ingrained, so embedded in the fiber of our community? What do we have to do in order to make public resources more accessible to actually meet people's needs, immigrants and everyone else? Like, I could go on and on about immigrant tenants and how, you know, they should know their rights, and they don't, and no one ever explains these things, like on the part of the state. But the fact of the matter is, like, we need housing, affordable, quality housing for all. And we need everything to be inclusive of immigrants as well. We need public programs to be available to immigrants, especially during the time of COVID. This is a public health crisis, and, you know, everyone is affected regardless of your immigration status. I think I'll step off the soapbox now.
It's a big old box. There's room for all up here on Missouri's soapbox here. I do think, in sort of like zooming back out a little bit, is that when, and especially I think as it relates to the work that we're hoping to be a part of and facilitate in some way over the next 3 years, is that folks feel very attached to Jefferson City. And that is one place where change can happen, right? And it's not the only place. And I'm going to go real Missouri on you here for a minute, because your girl's from Eureka and I grew up here. And it is very common for those of us that maybe live here to go on what we know as a float trip. And when you're on so-called float trips, this often requires a poorly constructed raft and slightly banged up rental canoe that requires some paddling action. And if you're an unfortunate soul like myself, who on occasion has stopped in the middle of a 4-hour, 8-hour float to have lunch, and then 2 hours later realize that you left your cell phone at the little lunch spot up the stream, you got to turn around and start paddling like your life depends on it. And this is a metaphor for how we build power, right? I can paddle like a boss for that first like 10 minutes. And I'm like, oh, this is totally no problem. I can totally make it back up there. I'll be done in no time. And approximately on the 11th minute, I will be dead and my arms will be exhausted. And I will need the rest of the people who are in my boat, mad at me for forgetting my cell phone, to start paddling. And the higher upstream you go, right, the more you paddle, the more current you're fighting, the more tired you get, and the more resources, the more strength you need to keep going higher up the river, right? Now, what that means is, if I'm trying to go all the way up to where I drop my phone, I'm going to need a certain amount of effort to get there. If I just drop my phone like on the previous bend, I'm going to need less power to get there and fix it. And if I realize that I forgot something all the way at the beginning, better get some caffeine and some power bars and like figure out how that's going to happen, right? And so when I think about how we're going to bring about changes in Missouri, I'm not sure that I have enough people in my boat to go all the way up to Jeff City and be heard, right? And so where I'm thinking about now is, you know what? It needs to be more than just my little canoe. I need to open my eyes to see all the other canoes that are in this river. And I need to bring everyone on the sideline who's like, look at those chumps in the river, right? Isn't that cute? They're trying so hard. All y'all need to get in the river too. Right. And so part of what I'm thinking about when I look at this question, I think, Polly, you mentioned it too, is like, yeah, there might be, you know what? Missouri can't pass citizenship for all. That has to come from the federal government. And so, like, does that mean nothing except the federal government matters? No, that means I have to build power right here so that when I get all the way up there, I can't be ignored. We can't be ignored anymore. And so I think that is also part of how I'd answer this question, is thinking about like, yeah, okay, sure, Missouri legislature. And if we're going to make change there, what is it going to take, and what can you do starting now to build that team? Okay, it looks like we have one other question from YouTube about vaccination rates for local immigrants, particularly undocumented folks, and how people can help with that effort. Anyone want to talk about vaccination and immigration? Rita, would you like to talk about ISPN's efforts there?
Absolutely. So, Yes. So one of the things that I didn't explain earlier about ISPN is that how we, make people work together. And so essentially what happens is that people from different agencies show up and sometimes they'll volunteer to be a part of a committee. And these committees have specific topics, whether it's about language access, whether it's about the census and trying to get more immigrants involved and being counted. We had a committee about the COVID-19 vaccine and trying to figure out how do we collaborate in order to make sure that people have all of the information that they need in order to make the best choice about their health and their family's health. So in this, we have providers who were, crowdsourcing different resources, sharing different multilingual resources, understanding what their clients were saying about, misinformation, things that they had heard on the news, on Facebook, and WhatsApp, and then trying to, meet people where they are and, address misinformation, working with other partners in the community who are also doing this on a regional level. And one thing that I would highlight that IFCLA has done specifically is set up a program in order to accompany individuals who are Spanish speaking to get their COVID-19 vaccine if they did so choose. And so it was in order to pair someone as a compassionate presence, as someone who could walk with them through this time, because there wasn't a lot of language access and there's a lot of misinformation. And so how do we as a community come together and walk with our neighbors in the scary time and, try to make sure that, we have everything that we need to be healthy. So I didn't give you the numbers, but I told you what we did.
I think something really neat was also to make those who were holding some of the clinics kind of aware of things like modesty, right? That they weren't thinking that sometimes our neighbors didn't feel comfortable showing their sleeves and saying, hey, you may want to think that you may want to have some closed up areas in case someone is not comfortable showing their arm. Or have you considered that perhaps having military guys around the building may feel some folks feel unsafe? Would they be willing to wear a t-shirt instead? So making them think about those factors that may inhibit someone from showing up into the vaccination clinic. And I give a shout out to all of our partners who worked so hard. Many folks work above and beyond their hours to volunteer at different vaccine clinics, either setting up their own vaccine clinics or participating in city and county clinics. So shout out to all the folks who work super hard.
I will also echo those efforts. Having service providers on that committee, having service providers, tell the state government, your vaccine navigator that you're telling everyone to use is only in English, and we have these people whose primary language is not English. So what are you going to do about it? And so the vaccine navigator is now available in a few different languages, if you did not know. And also, the reason for me not saying numbers of undocumented people getting the vaccine, the public health data that is out on that, there is no public health data out on that. People are not collecting that data. It is not something that is described. And that was the premise of ISPN collaborating with some folks at Washington University in order to understand and explain how COVID is impacting immigrants and immigrant service providers, because no one's talking about it. And so how can we possibly tell people that this is an issue if you don't have these experiences that are organized in such a way where you can just, explain this to people and say, hey, this data is missing. County, city, hospitals, look at this, do something about it. Data is power.
And I wanted to talk about, Chris mentioned earlier something about terms of data in terms of number of immigrants in St. Louis or in the state. And as a geek, I struggle with that data because folks sometimes live in certain communities where they weren't accessed properly, or the information wasn't shared with them. The other thing is like, oh, we should have another whole conversation about race and ethnicity. As someone who's Puerto Rican and is biracial presenting, and then how is the COVID data? Is it based on your, if you're a Black immigrant, do you count yourself as Black? But then it doesn't say that you are an immigrant from Haiti. So the data is not necessarily accurate, and I would be afraid that we're misplacing at times some blame on certain communities. So I see what Rita's doing. I see you, like, because we need to be careful with how we present data. Data needs to come with narrative. But yeah, we should definitely have another combo about race, ethnicity, and language spoken at home.
Love it. Awesome. Okay, we are coming up to time. So I'm going to pull our slides back up one more time because we have a couple of clear sort of like suggestions and invitations for what to do next. And so if you could bear with me for one tiny moment while I navigate the multitude of windows that are on my very tiny laptop right here. Nope, share. See, I did the wrong button. Here we go. We're loving the Zoom these days. Can you see a screen that says next steps? Excellent. All right. The first thing I think that you've heard all of us talk about is this sort of getting closer. And how do we encounter and really see each other, knowing that data is going to get gathered, collected in challenging ways, and it's not going to capture everything. And we have all these lived experiences and blah, blah, blah. We have to like do a better job coming together. And so here are some maybe invitations and ways to do that. The first one is that I would like you all to join us on November 1st at 5:30. We will gather outside of the Robert A. Young Federal Building, which is at the corner of Spruce and Tucker, downtown St. Louis. That building, among other federal offices, also houses the Office of Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And we will gather for a vigil, interfaith vigil, peaceful, to honor and remember and name people who have died and people who have been harmed by the immigration systems that we've been talking about tonight. So you don't have to know anything about Dia de los Muertos. You don't have to know anything about death and detention or in the border and any of those things. You can just show up and you can learn and you can be present. I'll share a link. We partnered last year with St. Louis University and the Lived Religion in the Digital Age project to create some sort of interactive Day of the Dead altar spaces and materials that are still available online. So you can explore like what are the different parts of an altar, how is Day of the Dead or Dia de los Muertos celebrated in different countries, and where do those traditions come from? And so I'll make sure to share that link. So there's information on our website and our Facebook page, but we'll follow up after tonight as well. Additionally,
oh, was that an invitation to speak? Excuse me. So actually, Chris should be speaking about this, but I'm not going to make her. The ISPN is hosting a conference next month. The title is Voices in the Intersections. You know, last year we talked a lot about COVID and how it's a time of upheaval. This is a time to celebrate and to recognize the ways that we come together as a community. And so that will be held on November 16th from 9:30 to 4:30 virtual, and we're going to try a hybrid. Keep us in your thoughts.
More details, and again, we'll share all the links, but I just want to name them here for folks that are maybe watching. I also want to say that you have heard from each of us that a lot of the work that we do depends on you. We could probably all have much bigger staffs and do more work, but we don't. And part of this is about transforming our communities. And you are part of those communities. And so if you want to be part of that transformation, I would invite you to sign up, go to a training. I know Polly mentioned every month they have the informed trauma community trainings. And so if you can sign up for one of those, please do. She also talked about the ambassador program there. I know that Chris mentioned the Abriendo Puertas initiative. There's also collaborative efforts between St. Francis and IFCLA, and shout out to Micah Project, who's not here tonight, but we always need volunteers for asylum clinics and other stuff coming up. So you have 3 choices here. We could give you more if you need, but now you can't say that you didn't know how to do it. So here's how to do it. And finally, if you don't have time, or if you're looking for another way to get involved, your financial contribution to any of our organizations, our coalitions, and our partner organizations truly do make a difference. Part of how we change community is organizing people, and part of how we change community is organizing money. And I know many of you at CRC especially know very well what organized money looks like in Missouri, and it is not always in service of our common values. So if you want to start to chip away at that, there's 4 links here. I could send you 40 more if you need them. It can be $5, it can be $500, it can be $5,000, and everywhere in between. Please donate. And I think I will end it there. I will make sure that you have this slide specifically, which has everyone's contact information on it, so that you know how to reach us. And I think I'm going to turn it back to Rabbi Daniel to close us up. Oh, I can't hear you. Can anyone else hear me?
No, I was still muted.
Okay, great.
I'll close just by thanking the 4 of you for giving of your time to be with us here tonight, and even more so for the work that you are doing to make our communities closer to the places that they should be, that they always should have been. So genuinely, thank you all for all you have done. Sarah, I'll see you at a board meeting soon, I'm sure. And just really nice to be with you all on this Tuesday.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone.